Welcome to On the Beat, where we bring you a different Buffalo Bills beat reporter every week, exclusively on the Overreaction Sports Network.
Welcome everybody back. It's another edition of On the Beat here on the Overreaction Buffalo Sports Network. We are powered by Believe. And we're here every Tuesday night, 8 Eastern, 7 Central. Excited with our guest this evening. Back on the show, Jay Skurski, Buffalo Bills beat reporter from the Buffalo News. And Jay, how's it going, man?
Hey, doing really well. Thank you very much for having me back.
Hey, no problem. Thanks for spending time with us. I know you guys are real busy, especially with trying to get through last weekend's game. Then we got press conferences tomorrow, getting prepped for that. Before we get into the first question, and obviously I think most people know we're going to get into, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button. If you're watching on Facebook Live or over on X, hop into YouTube, get in the comments, as many do, and really good interactive community. Again, we're trending upwards, and that's because you guys are listening and watching on YouTube, and we really appreciate you. And obviously today it comes down late in the day. The NFL has suspended Von Miller for 4 games on their personal conduct policy. Most people would think it was for the incident last year with his girlfriend, although on Twitter, Tim Graham reports he has a source with the Bills that said they truly don't know why he was suspended, which reason he is suspended. Is there more out there than we know? Obviously, it could be something we have no idea about.
It could, and I think we should keep in mind here, too, that Von Miller does have a history. He has not been charged, but there have been incidents. There have been incidents in Denver. There was an incident with a ex-girlfriend that revolved around for lack of a better term, it was a revenge porn case that Von Miller was. I think there was a lawsuit. Again, no arrests, and same situation in Dallas, no formal charges down in Dallas with that situation. We know that he was arrested. I think that the NFL, you have to remember that the NFL considers those things, and the personal conduct policy a suspension does not have to be a legal finding, right? A legal guilty plea or something like that. So there is a history here with Von Miller of being involved in incidents that the NFL would prefer, certainly, that he was not involved in. Now, whether or not all of that past history impacted here, you mentioned Tim's report. Tim's been doing this a long time, a great reporter. I have not heard one way or the other what the suspension is for. The NFL obviously did not announced that. So I think we should be careful with the speculation. We should deal with the facts, right? The facts are that we know he's suspended for 4 games. And, does the reason matter? Of course it does matter. But, the immediate this is the situation that the Bills are dealing with, is that Von Miller is going to miss the next 4 games.
And Jay, you bring up a great point earlier when you're talking about this and being in the NFL and kind of knowing how they work. And obviously they don't do anything quickly with these investigations. They take their time. They have their own investigative group that goes in and seeks information, and then they make their own decision on these things. But, right away, people were saying, well, that case never was filed. It was thrown out. There was nothing there. There was no arrests or anything. And I think you bring up a great point. That does not necessarily mean that there's nothing there. And the NFL's been known to rule against someone just on what they find.
Absolutely. It's a very important point. It's one that we have to remember in this situation. The NFL does not need to have a guilty verdict, a guilty plea, anything like that to impose their discipline based on the personal conduct policy, which is pretty far reaching in terms of what they can deem worthy of a suspension. And again, I think this is all a little bit speculative in nature, but we know based on what happened down there in Dallas, and we know that, obviously Von Miller has addressed that situation. So something happened down there, right? Whatever it may be. And to your point, Jared, obviously the NFL has spent a good deal of time, I'm sure, looking into it. And, does the suspension stem from that? Does it stem from something else? Right now, we don't know the answer to that.
Jay Skurski joins us, Buffalo Bills beat reporter from the Buffalo News. And, obviously with Von being suspended now for 4 games, we would have to think that Solomon, who seems to be healthy, is going to be the guy that's going to have to step up and take his reps. Obviously, they go out and sign a practice squad defensive lineman today, but he's an interior guy, not necessarily a D end. Are they looking at maybe moving somebody? Have you heard anything about that, or is this going to be the Solomon show from here in the next 4 games?
Yeah, I mean, I think you got a rookie that you like, that you've been developing here. I think this is an opportunity for him to come in and show what he can do. If it doesn't go well, you've got a couple of defensive ends on the practice squad who have had time on the 53-man roster, and Cameron Klein and also Kingsley Jonathan, who spent a decent amount of time on the 53. I don't know that you need to look outside the organization at edge rusher at this point. I think you've got 3 options right there. I mean, you still have your top 3 in Smoot, Rousseau, and Epinesa. They're gonna probably all 3 of them might see a slight uptick in playing time because of this. And then to me, Solomon is the guy that, he has got maybe the most juice as a pass rusher of those guys, and maybe the most potential. You kept him on the 53 for a reason. This is a very good opportunity for him as a young player to go out and show what he can do.
And obviously, Vaughn has 3 sacks in the first 3 games, picked up 1 sack per game. But we're talking about a guy now, the decisions made for the 4-game suspension, but we're talking about a guy that played 9 plays on Sunday night.
Yeah.
It wasn't like he was out there a ton.
No, and obviously I think circumstances in that game dictated that. Obviously, the Ravens get an early lead. They can run the ball as much as they want. I think Lamar Jackson attempted, 19 passes, something like it was under 20.
18.
Yeah, 18 passes. So, I mean, that's going to limit your amount of pass rush opportunities if you're Von Miller. Sean McDermott was asked about that on Monday. He did say that they are, cognizant and sort of monitoring his reps, but his reps being that low, I think, was more a circumstance of the game than it was anything else, health related or anything like that. Because to your point, he had gotten off to a good start to the season and had said, I mean, he's maybe the most optimistic person you'll ever talk to, but he had said repeatedly that he was starting to feel really, really good. So I think his usage against Baltimore was due more to the score and circumstances of the game than it was anything else.
We're talking about this Ravens game, just a couple questions to finish it up. Obviously, Sunday night, Bills Mafia, myself, whoever, this game did not go necessarily as we thought. Now, I thought the Bills were going to definitely have some matchup problems. It was a game I had circled on the calendar or on the schedule for quite a while. The other game being the 49ers, who can do similar stuff in that run game. But, final thoughts on this game a little bit. Did this game really, really expose Buffalo? Do they have glaring holes, or is this kind of a one-off thing where you live and you learn, you got downhill quick, that snowball gets rolling, and it's hard to recover from that kind of start when you're in a hostile environment on the road Sunday night?
Yeah, a lot of things worked against them, right? I didn't like the way that the game started. The 4th and 2 at the 50-yard line on the opening drive, I think that's a go-for-it situation every time. I'm surprised, quite frankly, that Sean McDermott decided to punt there, especially after converting an earlier 4th down on that drive. I know it was much shorter. It was 4th and inches, but I just don't like the tone that set. I felt like they had been really aggressive. You think back to the Miami, the Jacksonville games. There was no hesitation on those 4th down calls, and they were beautiful calls by Joe Brady. I just think with Josh Allen, who's playing, going into that game at an MVP level, that you got to have a play that gets you 2 yards, right? And obviously, then the Henry thing happens, and from that point, you're just chasing the game. That set up perfectly for Baltimore because it gets them into the situation of being able to run the football, which is, of course, what they wanted to do, right? And so, they got behind it early, and it just felt like one of those games for, there was a brief stretch there in the 3rd quarter where you thought, okay, maybe something's happening. But 55 of those minutes out of the 60, Baltimore was in control of the game. And, I'm more of the mindset that, you flush it, right? You just burn the tape of that one and you move on. You're still off to a 3-1 start. There were a couple things that concern me. I think any loss, you're going to have things that concern you moving forward. I'd love to hear from you, Jerry, about, what you thought was happening up front, why the Ravens were able to get the pressure that they were on Josh. Josh, I think, alluded to maybe communication with the offensive line wasn't where it needed to be at times. But, you go back to the 2 previous games, Miami and Jacksonville, he was not sacked he had only been hit one time in those 2 games.
Right.
I think he was hit 8 times against the Ravens. So that's concerning, right? Because, Josh is at his best when he's making that first rush or miss, which he's so good at, but you got to give him a little bit more time to make some plays, and he didn't have that.
They did a lot of things I felt really well, being when I say they, Baltimore. One of the things that helped them get pressure was they do a really good job in their passing, and when in an opponent's passing situations. They you saw 4 down linemen in running situations, but really it's kind of a hybrid looking 3-4. They kind of do some funky stuff. And Van Noy, who had a huge game for the Ravens, is kind of the key piece to that. But when you look at them in passing situations, they get in that true traditional 3-man look, but they bring their linebackers up and they bring other guys up, and they kind of show pressure here, and then they'll back out and bring pressure elsewhere. So when you see the line and you see Josh set protection, you see those guys pointing, they're saying who they're sliding to. Well, if you're sliding to that guy and all of a sudden the guy you're going to that you're responsible for bails and they're bringing pressure from the other side, now your pass pro has been weakened because you got guys moving to the other side to go to where you called. The backs get confused because they know when that point is made, okay, the line has that guy. Now I got to sift these other 2. Well, if that guy bails and they bring pressure from other spots. So Baltimore does a really good job of playing games up front with who's coming and who's not coming. The other thing is it's just football. When you're on the road and you're behind in a loud stadium against an aggressive defense, there is no lonelier feeling than playing offensive line because they're bringing it. There is no play action. There is no running game that can ease that pass rush up. Those guys are coming at you, and it's crazy, man. You're backing up, and somebody that maybe is almost as equally as big as you but more athletic is running full speed at you. So it's definitely tough. But I thought Baltimore, really, a lot of the pressures were because of that kind of phantom. They'd give you one look and they would drop there and they'd bring from the other side. And the other thing I thought they did really well when they rushed, they didn't really rush those guys up the middle. They really contain rushed with those extra DBs to where they were rushing outside and aiming points for Josh's outside shoulder. So, a lot of times you'll see Josh get outside and get those big runs around the corner. You didn't see that because they did a really good job. And just like the big throw he made to Shakir, which was quite possibly one of the best quarterback plays I've ever seen, he still had minimal time and had guys every time he rolled out in any sort of play action or tried to roll out to gain time, there was always 1 to 2 guys that were rushing hard on that outside shoulder to try to keep him in. So just really, really good game plan by the Ravens.
Yeah, one thing you mentioned there too that I think we should mention is, you talked about, you get down on the road and it was a tough environment, right? And it's not that the Bills are a young team, but they had not experienced that this season, right? They go down to Miami, their only road game, and they blow them out. And half the time that's a home game, right? When you're playing down in Miami with the amount of Bills fans. So the atmosphere, if you're Balin Spector or you're Dorian Williams and you got Derrick Henry coming downhill at you and it's loud in there, and I do wonder how much that, and some of the younger players, Keon Coleman and even Dalton Kincaid is a second-year player. I know he's not necessarily a rookie, but you wonder how did they handle that type of environment. It's good experience, right? And again, that's not to make an excuse, but I think all of it factors into what ended up just being kind of a stinker of a game. And you're going to have those in this season. And the final score is a little concerning because it had not been. They just don't get blown out. I mean, 43 games in a row without losing by more than 8 points, right? So it's just that type of thing really doesn't happen to this team. But they also don't usually lose 2 in a row, right? So it's like, so as long as it, is a one-off and it was a tough night, and then I think you can write it off as just that, a tough night. We'll see how they respond though, because, they said early when they were 3-0, we are going to face adversity this season, and everyone expected that, and they've got a little bit of a taste of it here now.
Jay Skurski joins us, Buffalo News, and one of the things, Jay, that I gotta ask you, and one thing that I really liked about the Bills' performance, and there wasn't a ton on playing wise that was great, but they did not quit. They didn't go into a hole, and they come out in the third quarter. They get the touchdown on the big, at the first play after the big throw by Allen. They get a stop. They come back out. They're getting momentum again. One of the things I thought they did too early was get away from that running game, and Joe Brady talked about that in his press conference yesterday. But they did not quit, and they still fought until the end. One of the guys I have a lot of respect for is Joe Marino. He does a great job on his breakdowns, and I was watching his all 22, and he was talking about just how poor some of the game planning was. And I have to ask, when you look at this game, and it seems by their responses in the press conferences, they took a lot of responsibility. They meaning, Bobby Babbich Jr. and Joe Brady, just how much of this Ravens game and performance was on the coaching staff and the game plan in general.
Well, I tweeted this yesterday as Joe Brady was talking. Say this for him: he accepted responsibility. He must have said a dozen times in a 10 or 15-minute press conference that I've got to do a better job, or some semblance of that sentiment. He was owning it, and obviously everybody's going to point to the play that really turned the momentum of the game. The failed snap to Samuel and pitch to Allen, and who knows what was going on, because that play wasn't going to work. It was dead from the minute the ball was snapped. They should have gotten out of it. And that's not me, offering my opinion, although it is my opinion, but that's Joe Brady saying that too. So yeah, I think that, this is a game, and Sean McDermott said it afterwards too, that, while I said earlier, flush it, right? It's not that simple. And that didn't happen, right? That they reviewed it, and it was probably not a very fun Monday and Tuesday watching the film of that game. But I think Joe Brady is going to take away a lot from it. And I think he has built up through the first three games a lot of goodwill, a lot of, I think, should be trust amongst his players, amongst the team's fans, if you want even that. It was not a good night for him, no question. And let's see how he bounces back. For Bobby Babbich, I think you can say a lot of the same things. And, you were right. I thought the defense, again, small sample size, but they come out in the second half, they get a 3-and-out, the offense gets the ball, they score, the defense gets another 3-and-out, right? And so the offense gets the ball back again. And if they score there, even a field goal makes it 21-13 at that point. But if they get that touchdown, it's 21-17, maybe it's 21-18 if they go for two. And so there was a window there. And to your point, I think that is, again, silver linings are small coming out of this game. I get it. But you're right. They didn't turtle. And there was an opportunity to sort of get back in the game. It didn't happen. But I'm sure, again, if you're looking for positives to build on, that's one of them.
Definitely, because it takes a tremendous amount of energy to be able to turn momentum like that on the road and get back in the game. And when the trick play was called and the turnover happens, you see the quarterback, the franchise laying on the field. That's kind of when the wind left the sails, and it was pretty much done after that. But real quick, as we move on to the Houston game coming up this week, obviously, I don't know if there's anything to talk about with this Houston Texans game. It's kind of blasé. I mean, there's really not much going on. But before we get into the obvious, updates on Bernard Johnson and Shakir injuries. I know that Sean McDermott talked about the injuries today, said we will probably see Bernard sooner than Johnson. Any insight on the injury report with the Bills?
Yeah, so with Bernard practicing last week a couple of times, said afterward after the Friday practice that he was feeling okay, feeling pretty good. It was good for him to be out there. I think you gotta expect that he's got a chance here, right? I mean, you're not bringing him back last week if you didn't have any inclination that maybe he's got a chance. It is a little concerning that Taryn didn't get into a practice last week. McDermott did not sound overly optimistic that he was going to be able to practice either. I'd be hard pressed to imagine him going out there with, anything less than a couple of practices. I think he would have to be out there Thursday and Friday to feel comfortable playing him. I mean, I know he's a veteran, great player, but that's a pretty significant time off now, going back to the first quarter of week one. So a little shaky there. And then the thing with Shakir that's really hard to know is how did he come out of the game? We know he was able to finish it, but as adrenaline can do a lot of crazy things, can get you through. Maybe there was some painkillers in there too during the game. How did it react after the game? We know he was in a walking boot to fly home. That maybe was to keep swelling down on the flight. We'll see it. We'll see tomorrow at practice. Usually it's a good sign when a player is able to go back in and finish the game, but it doesn't always have to be the case. Listen, they need Shakir. He's been the most consistent among the wideouts. He's been the guy that Josh has looked to most often. So that would be a big loss if he were not able to be ready. I would be shocked if he was a full participant tomorrow. I think they'll be careful with him. I think he'll be limited. But he's a guy that a little different than Terrence, since he's been in there. I think you could probably play him on minimal practice time just because of, he's in the flow of the offense right now.
Right. And obviously a big week for a guy like Taron Johnson. We go from, playing the Ravens and that physical style of play to now we're looking at Houston, which is back kind of running an offense that the Bills kind of really are made to play against. They like to be in nickel. They like to be in dime. Taron Johnson, obviously the key to that nickel defense, for the Bills. But when you look at this Houston team, and I want to talk about Diggs a little bit, and obviously the whole Diggs matchup with the Bills will be talked about all week long. But I look at this situation in Houston, and you're talking about a team, obviously Stroud playing quarterback, but you've got Stephon now not having to be the man, playing it more of a, he's a supporting cast guy now. You got Nico Collins, who's obviously their number one guy, Tank Dell, who can play. Then you got Stephon and other weapons on that offense. Do you believe this is probably, considering this point in his career, a better situation for Stephon Diggs where he doesn't feel like he has to be the guy that makes all the plays and he can walk in the office and demand the ball 30 times all he wants? He's not going to get it.
Yeah.
So obviously maybe a little bit he understands his role with this team.
It's a hard question to answer because knowing what I know about Stephon Diggs and knowing, I'm trying to choose my words carefully here, knowing how wide receivers are, right. I don't know. I don't know if he's ready to make that adjustment in his career, if he's ready to play a supporting character. I think usually when he goes to a new place, there's a honeymoon period. There was in Buffalo. It lasted a good long while too, right? And
right.
But how's he going to react? And listen, they're off to a 3-1 start. Winning cures everything. That's true for every team. They haven't looked dominant in going 3-1. I think they've only scored 24 points in one game.
Right.
So it's not like they're setting the world on fire offensively. I'm not there every day to gauge the temperature in that room and to just observe the body language, observe, reading between the lines of Stephon Diggs' press conferences, which you have to do with him. It's not as simple as just here's what he said, right? There's always more to it. So is it a better situation? I mean, listen, it's a good offense. I mean, no question. CJ Stroud's an exciting quarterback. As you mentioned, Nico Collins is developing into, one of a top flight receiver in this league. But Stephon Diggs has been the man for a long, long time in his career. And that's not always an easy adjustment to make for a player. So I think it remains to be seen how he's going to make that adjustment. I think, it's going okay right now. But let's see if they run into some adversity and how it goes, because history would suggest that things don't end well with Stephon Diggs wherever he's been in the NFL.
Right. Stephon Diggs got his first touchdown of the season last week in week 4 for the Houston Texans. And just real quick, Jay, just an overview a little bit of this Texans team. If you had a chance to see much of them defensively, offensively, all that stuff, just a real quick overview of the team.
Yeah, so I watched a good deal of this Jacksonville game this past week. I had not seen too much of their game. I know they got blown out by Minnesota, but Minnesota looks like a juggernaut right now. I thought Jacksonville should have won, honestly. I thought
they should have, yeah.
I thought that game was right there for the Jags. The pass rush for Houston on paper looks really good. You've got those two defensive ends, Hunter and Anderson. I mean, those guys are tough to deal with. But for me, there's a couple things about Houston that stand out. Number one is, and the Bills went through this not so long ago, that preseason hype, I think, can be hard for a team. And right. I think they were probably the team, right? They were maybe not a Super Bowl pick, but they were kind of the darlings of the offseason. And they go out and get Diggs, and the way that Stroud finished his rookie season, they're justifiably, there was a ton of excitement about him and that offense. But it hasn't all clicked just yet. And so I think that this is a game, when you look at both teams sitting at 3-1 and the divisions that both are in, neither division looks real good right now, right? Jacksonville looks terrible. Indy is Indy. So I think, this would be, for Houston, it's a game where you say, we are to be taken seriously with the Kansas Cities and the Baltimores and the Buffaloes of the world, of the AFC, right? That hierarchy has always kind of been there. And for the Bills, I think it's, this is an opportunity to say, yeah, we had a bad game last week, but we're the team that played the first 3 weeks more so than we are the team that lost to Baltimore. So I think it's a really fascinating game. Obviously, the Diggs angle is, something that we in the media just love. We eat it up, right? We're going to talk about it all week. We're going to write about it all week. It's a lot of fun to cover from that, that way. But I think as far as early October, week 5 games go, there's a lot riding on this one for both sides.
Obviously, Houston, and this is from our listeners' comments. Houston goes out and signs Joe Mixon in the offseason. He's been injured, not playing the last week or two. Any word on Mixon if he'll be back this week?
Yeah, so listening to some Houston sports talk and reading some things last week, it sounds like Mixon maybe almost could have played last week, and they sat him almost like they were sitting him for the Bills game. Maybe borderline disrespectful if you're the Jaguars, saying, "Oh, we can win this one without him." Now it turns out they did, but barely, right? And so I would suspect that we'll see Mixon in this game.
Real quick before I give you the last question, just let our listeners know where they can find you. Jay Skurski, Buffalo Bills beat reporter for the Buffalo News. Where can they find you on social and all that, Jay?
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, so on X, it's just my name @Jay Skurski. That's JaySkurski. And if you want to shoot me an email, I do a mailbag every week in the Buffalo News. Pretty popular. Get a lot of email questions to that. It's the letter J, Skurski @buffnews, BUFFNEWS.com.
Jay, one of my top guests on the show because of the last 3 letters of his name. Got to go with that Polish background. Obviously tomorrow, media days, you'll be at the stadium and all that. Just kind of questions you're going to get into. Some of the things maybe you want to know about the Bills heading into this week's game against Houston.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it starts with Solomon, right? What kind of role is he? Is he the guy? First of all, Sean McDermott has been pretty upfront about lineup decisions. He's named starters. He's talked about, would Balen Spector start when Terrell Bernard went out? He said that. So I think the first question is, how do you replace Von Miller in the game day lineup? Is it Javon Solomon? Offensively, I think it's, what do you have to do? And this was something we talked about with Joe Brady. One guy that I think it's time to focus in on here a little bit, key in on it, is Curtis Samuel, right? Yep. You brought him here because Joe Brady is here largely, right? And Joe Brady has had success. He knows how to use Curtis Samuel. It's one thing when Curtis Samuel has 2 catches for 8 yards and you're winning by 20 or 30 points. Okay, you can forget that. You can say, no big deal. Everybody eats. It's fine. But when you're losing and you're losing badly and you need somebody on offense to make a play, that's where, to me, I look to Curtis Samuel as the veteran, as the guy who's paid the best in that group to show up. And they just, for some reason, it has not clicked through the first 4 weeks. His usage has been very low. His production has been even lower. And I think they got to get him going. And I know you're not forcing it to him and you're not forcing it to anybody. And I understand the whole plan on offense, but this is a 25% of the season, or I guess a little less now since we're at 17 games, but the sample size is big enough to say they got to do something here to get Curtis Samuel going a little bit.
Right, exactly, because he's been sold to us as kind of a poor man's Deebo Samuel, right?
Yeah.
A guy that can line up in the backfield, use him in motion, different things like that. Obviously, we would love to see him in situations that don't include trick plays into the boundary. But yeah, I mean, I think you're right. And he talked about it today in his press conference about trying to get him more involved. Jay, man, we appreciate your time as always. Thank you so much. We look forward to reading your stuff in the Buffalo News and checking in on what you got to say about this week's game. I know you're busy, so we appreciate you spending the time to come on with us.
Absolutely. I appreciate you having me. Thanks again for having me on the show.
He's Jay Skurski, Buffalo Bills beat reporter for the Buffalo News. I am the Big O, Jay Skurski. You've been listening to and watching On the Beat here on the Buffalo Overreaction Buffalo Sports Network, powered by Believe. And you can check us out, the tape version on YouTube. Also hit all the platforms for the podcast tomorrow as it will be released. And tomorrow night, Hump Day with Spence and Joe, as always. And, man, thanks. And we appreciate your support, folks. As always, much love. Go Bills.